Today, we are going to talk about the topic you've all been waiting for: public spending in the European Union following the coronavirus. Wait, don't leave us just yet, okay? Don't fall asleep. I know that talking about the general budget of the European Union sounds like the most boring topic on the planet, but we're talking about one of the largest public spending operations in history. Over a period of more than 7 years, Europe is going to spend more than 2 trillion euros. And yes, I said trillions with a capital T. Where will all this money come from? Well, if you're watching this video from any EU country, it will come directly from you, and probably if you live outside the European Union too. Why? We'll look at that a bit later. But what is certain is that we are talking about one of the most important issues of this era, an issue that is going to have profound consequences in our lives. In other words, it may seem boring, but believe me, you should pay attention to it. So the questions we are wondering today are: why does the European Union want to spend so much money precisely at this time? Where will this money go? Is it a good idea? Or are we perhaps facing a new era of what could be called crony capitalism? In this video, we're going to tell you.
The Keynesian Formula.
I know what you're all wondering. Why does the European Union want to bring out so many spending programs in this precise time? Actually, the European Union is not alone in this. The United States has also said that it is going to increase public spending, and many other countries are planning to do the same. So why, you may ask? Okay, we're in a unique situation. We just went through an entire pandemic that has left the economy trembling. Actually, we're not even sure we're done with the coronavirus pandemic. But what does an economic crisis have to do with increasing public spending? The answer lies with this man you see in the photo. Meet John Maynard Keynes, one of the most influential economists in history. We could say that Lord Keynes was the father of modern social democracy, although in reality, his economic doctrine has influenced parties right across the political spectrum. It has influenced and continues to influence. Proof of this is that, although he died in 1945, today we are still applying his formulas almost to the letter. And what did this fine man propose? Well, Keynes understood that the economy is a wheel that cannot be stopped. In his opinion, economic crises are bad because citizens stop consuming and that slows down the activity. The best way out of a crisis is keep the party going. Reactivate consumption by any means necessary. If private companies and citizens can no longer consume, then ideally the state should do it. After all, the state can always go into debt, raise taxes, or even print its own money. Of course, all these decisions have consequences, but by proxy, it can. So, Keynesian theory says, roughly, that in times of recession, the state has to spend. That spending will generate new jobs, which in turn translates into people with money in their pockets to buy things from private companies. Suddenly, the money starts moving again and the economy is lifted out of the doldrums. But not only that, private companies invest money in what is profitable, and that does not always benefit the common good. However, the state can decide to spend on things that are good for everyone. Science, innovation, public services, who could be against this? In principle, Keynesian formulas could seem to be the final solution to all major economic problems. Neither communism nor free markets. Keynesianism, the perfect marriage between business and state, right? As you can imagine, there is a problem. And for us to understand it better, let's examine it with an example. Spain, back in 2009. Spain was one of the countries hardest hit by the 2008 financial crisis. In less than 2 years, the unemployment rate doubled. And during those hard times, the then Prime Minister José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero made the most important announcement of his career.
En esto consiste el Plan Español de Estímulo de la Economía y el Empleo, que desde hoy vamos a llamar Plan E.
Yes, VisualPolitik fans, we are talking about the famous Plan E. In a few years, Spain spent between 12 and 50 billion euros. And yes, I know the range is very large, but even today it is difficult to calculate what the total amount of this plan actually was. And you will say, is that a lot of money for Spain? Well, as a comparison, Spain collected taxes in that same year, 2009, totaling 198 billion euros. That is, yes, suddenly Spain was spending money like there was no tomorrow. And now you'll say, but is it that simple? Suddenly the government started spending the money just like that, just for the sake of it? As ridiculous as it sounds, yes. Basically, during the years of Plan E, all Spanish cities repaved their streets, renewed their urban furniture, and put a statue on every roundabout. Remember that there was no concrete objective. It was not a plan to renovate hospitals because they'd become obsolete, nor was an attempt to improve, I don't know, infrastructure in general. No, the objective was to generate spending, to create jobs, to resuscitate the economy. So any project, no matter how ridiculous, was eligible for funding. Here's an example.
The public spa in the capital has been closed for a year and a half. The facility, built with funds from Plan E and with a budget of €959,000, was never opened.
And I know what many of you are thinking. What's the problem here? Okay, a city council could spend almost €1 million to build a spa that nobody ends up using, but what does it matter if the state can borrow to infinity and beyond? Well, yes, it's true. States can borrow more money than families or companies. All this is true, up to a point. Spain issued debt bonds like there was no tomorrow. Meanwhile, the Spanish media were too busy discussing whatever they decided were the hot topics of the moment. But the international investors, those who were lending money to Spain, were less and less confident that the Spanish state could pay back what it had borrowed. And what happens when investors don't trust you? Well, this happens.
Moody's cut Spain to one notch above junk.
In other words, Spain owed so much money that it was difficult to pay it back. And since no one trusted Spain, investors demanded higher interest rates to compensate for that risk. To give you an idea, there were years when interest payments alone accounted for the second largest item of expenditure in all budgets. And then the media stopped worrying about the trivial problems and began to consider the extent to which Spain was bankrupt. Believe me when I tell you that you don't want to live through a similar crisis. And I know what many of you are thinking. Grant, you have given us a very specific example. Spain is an example of poorly executed public spending. Probably Spanish politicians are corrupt or simply did not consult the right experts. But in this video, we're talking about the European Union. In this case, public spending is going to be overseen by the brightest minds in Europe, people who know exactly where and how to spend those €2 trillion efficiently. It's not spending for spending's sake, right? Well, we're going to look at that now.
Europe's helicopter money.
Before we continue, we have to make a small note. The budgets of the European Union are approved for the next 7 years. In other words, the budgets that have been approved cover the period from 2021 to 2027. The budgets that have just been approved can be divided into 3 items. The ordinary budget, which amounts to €1.1 trillion. Then we have the SURE mechanism, which is where aid is given to businesses that have suffered the most during lockdowns. Finally, there is the mother of all public spending, the Next Generation EU. This item accounts for €750 billion. And this is the European Union's big gamble. The idea behind this spending program is to make Europe the greenest, most digital, holistic, and 2.0 place in the world. And that translates into what we could call the Great European Fire Hose, the largest spending program in the history of the European Union. More than €2 trillion will be spent over the next 7 years. And yes, we are talking about trillions. To put it in perspective, this amount is almost 7 times what the total bailout of the Greek economy cost. And it has just been approved with almost no one putting up the slightest debate. So how is all this going to be paid for? Well, I think you can already imagine the answer.
European Parliament votes for new taxes in EU to repay recovery borrowing.
And now, I know what many of you are thinking. Is it really enough to create new taxes to finance all this spending? Obviously not. Europe needs cash and it needs it now. So what do states do when they need money fast? Well, I think you can probably guess the answer to that as well.
EU issues the largest single tranche bond to fund post-COVID recovery. The European Union sends a strong message with its inaugural Next Generation EU bond to support a green, digital, and responsible recovery.
That's right. Suddenly, what was once a taboo subject in the European Union is now a reality. Eurobonds. And why were Eurobonds a taboo subject in the European Union? We created a video on this topic on VisualPolitik a year ago. You'll find the link in the description. But in short, the problem with Eurobonds is that they relieve member states of the responsibility of paying debts. In other words, countries with low credit ratings like Spain or Greece rely on the more reliable countries in Europe like Germany or the Netherlands. All this might be a good idea if European budgets were implemented from Brussels, but the reality is very different. In truth, the European Union only provides the money. It is the member states that decide where it is spent. So how is this money being distributed? Is it divided equally? Is it allocated according to population density? Not at all. Look at this graph. Here, you can see how Spain is the undisputed winner in these budgets. It gets more than 15% of the entire European funding. And no, most of this money is not going to be managed from Brussels, but from Madrid. The way this works is as follows. The member countries, in this case Spain, present a spending plan to Brussels. Brussels approves it and pays all the bills. In other words, national politicians can take the medal for spending money hand over fist, while leaving the burden of debt and taxes to be carried by Europe. Now, I know what many of you are thinking. It cannot be that simple. We are talking about the European Union, the place where the brightest minds in world politics come together. Surely, there are a lot of controls to prevent money from ending up where it shouldn't be, right? Surely, Brussels is not going to allow a failure like Spain's disastrous Plan E. Well, you're partly right. The European Union wants to ensure that all member countries have the rule of law and anti-corruption mechanisms, and that explains news stories like this one.
The European Commission is ready to approve Poland's recovery plan as soon as November if Warsaw will agree to certain legally binding objectives to restore the rule of law.
In other words, the European Union has come to Poland and said, I will not give you your share of the money if you are not prepared to guarantee that it will not end up in the hands of the government's friends. Many of you may think that this is the definitive proof that in Brussels they know how to spend public money. But the question is, are these control mechanisms really enough? Well, we're going to look at that right now, and we're going to see it with the country that is set to receive the most money from these budgets. Check this out.
Spain is different, or perhaps not.
As we've said, Spain is the biggest beneficiary of these European budgets, and it was also one of the first countries to present its spending plan. The Spain Can Do It plan outlines how the Spanish government is going to spend more than 140 billion euros that will come from Europe. You can check it out on their website, which I'll link for you in the description. At the time of making this video, you could only see a couple of spending projects. What about the rest? Well, that's the fun part, because we don't know. In other words, the European Union has approved Spain's spending plan without it having been made public. Yes, this in itself is a lack of transparency, and a golden opportunity for big consulting firms like KPMG. Listen up.
KPMG revolutionizes consultancy on European funds. KPMG in Spain and local Europe have signed an alliance to offer a comprehensive solution of consultancy services on European funds, together with an exclusive technological tool that facilitates the identification of specific projects that may be eligible for access to aid.
That's right. The big consulting firms have already started to advise on how to get their hands on the European fire hose and who can afford to enlist KPMG's services. Believe me, we are talking about expensive services. Services that are only available to large companies. But wait, because you haven't seen anything yet. Among the projects that have been made public, there are two particularly striking ones. One is the rehabilitation of public buildings. That is, if Plan E served to pave all the streets of Spain, the Plan EU will serve to rehabilitate public buildings. Something that, as everyone knows, is fundamental to the fight against climate change and economic transformation, right? But wait, because there is still more. Another of the plans that Spain has proposed is the creation of an audiovisual hub. That is, Spain is going to spend a whopping 200 million euros in subsidies to make TV series and video games. And because these days everything has to be environmentally friendly, digital, holistic, and 2.0, this project includes gems like this one.
The Commission will work on a best practice guide for green production and service provision. The approach will be gradual, with the aim of raising awareness and pushing the industry to start implementing more sustainable solutions.
How can films be produced in an environmentally friendly and sustainable way? Well, I don't know. But there is a whole report on how to greenify audiovisual production. At this point, many of you may be asking yourselves, but who came up with this project? To what extent does the production of series and video games serve this green, digital, holistic, and 2.0 transformation that Europe needs so much? Well, those of you watching this video from Spain can already guess who is behind all this.
Media Pro is looking for a multi-million investment for its own audio-visual hub. According to Expansive, the group has started to search for capital, about 500 million euros, to create a new audio-visual hub in Spain.
For those of you who don't know Media Pro, it is a film and television production company with well-known ties to the political parties that are now in the Spanish government. Its president is this gentleman you see on the screen, whose name is Jaume Raures. Media Pro is on the verge of bankruptcy. In fact, they have asked several times for a government bailout. In other words, it could be said that this audiovisual hub of Europe project has a name and a surname. And pay attention, because it is not the only example. Check this out.
A judge unblocks the rescue of Plus Ultra by not appreciating, for now, any crime. The airline will receive the 34 million euros it has pending to continue operating.
In this case, we are talking about the rescue of an airline that operates 4 flights a week. Virtually no one knew of this existence until months ago. The owners of this airline also have certain connections with some members of the government. So Spain, of course, has not hesitated for a moment to bail them out. Of course, the bailout may be perfectly legal. After all, in times of the coronavirus, many other companies have been rescued. The question is this really a strategic company that needed to be rescued? If Plus Ultra is rescued, why shouldn't any other company be rescued? And you will say, but hang on, it can't be that simple. Surely someone in Brussels is responsible for ensuring that there is no corruption or cronyism when it comes to spending the money. And yes, you are right. There is a European body in charge of controlling public money, the Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office. The problem is that they are overwhelmed. Think of it this way. More public spending means more projects to research. According to an estimate by the European Commission, we are talking about a workload 9 times greater than normal. However, the number of researchers has barely increased. In other words, Europe is going to spend a lot of money on a lot of things, except hiring people to control or monitor the spending. So now, the question is over to you. Is this European fire hose really going to make Europe more green, sustainable, digital, holistic, and 2.0? Or are we facing a new era of crony capitalism? What impact is all this going to have on our pocket? Will we see a new debt crisis again? You can leave us your answer in the comments below. As always, don't forget that here on VisualPolitik, we release new videos every week. So subscribe to this channel and hit the little bell button down there so you don't miss any of our updates. If you like this video, like it so we find out, and I'll see you next time.